when Homer was writing, he wanted to convey a sense of the tragic position of mankind in the universe. And he did this because he had a particular worldview in his mind, and defy the gods is just not part of it.
Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be joined by Stelios today, and we're going to discuss Homer's Odyssey and also the importance of the Homeric epics for European civilization. Stelios, of course, is a member of the Lotus Eaters podcast. And we also want to discuss Christopher Nolan's, let's just say, missed opportunity when it comes to his adaptation of the Odyssey. We've seen the posters, we've seen the trailers, and we do find that something great could have been made here, but that's been missed. And I think it's important because this text is one of the foundational texts of our culture, of our civilization. Now, people can find Stelios a link to his YouTube channel, his philosophy YouTube channel. If people don't know this, he is a PhD in philosophy, as am I. Stelios, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for this invitation. It's an honor, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
So I think we should almost be grateful to Christopher Nolan for you ended up, or I ended up on your shore of Twitter. So there's been a bit of a wave of backlash against this movie, even though it's not out yet, because it seems to have struck a nerve with people, and quite a few Greek people as well, and many Europeans who are outraged by it, or may not even perhaps think of themselves as part of the culture war. Why do you think there was such a backlash against the trailer and what we've seen so far?
Well, there is such a backlash. I don't know how big it will be and how much it will affect the box office, but I definitely see people who are annoyed at it. And I think that they're basically annoyed at it because we are at a stage in the culture wars where it's absolutely crystal clear that all this is done on purpose. And also, when it comes to Christopher Nolan specifically, I consider him to be a good director. I know you don't consider him to be such a good director, but I like some of his movies. But it seems to me that this is not something you rewrite. And it seems to me that when it comes to art, we should hold artists to high standards. And he has built a reputation and a legacy that merits me judging him with high standards. But also, we're talking about the Odyssey. It's one of the most fundamental epics of ancient Greece and European civilization. So there is, it's self-evident in a way. It's self-justifying. But one thing I will say, because it's very tricky sometimes to convey these ideas in public, especially because we are in a culture where almost any deviation from what I call within quotation marks, progressive narratives is painted straightforwardly as right-wing extremism, which is very ahistorical, very stupid, very wrong. So one thing I will say was that some years ago, there was a movie called Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey. It was a comedy. And in this movie, God was played by Morgan Freeman. Now, in European art, God isn't depicted in a way that you'd say as a black person, but there was no backlash there. Why? Because, first of all, people didn't see this as a choice that was specifically designed to talk down at them. And this is what we're seeing now. Second, there was a sort of merit-based understanding of it. You could say, for instance, he has a great voice. We tend to associate a deep, warm voice with the divine. So they kind of brought him there. And as an actor, he is a great actor. So he does have this authority about him. And there was no backlash. But so much has happened since Bruce Almighty. And people have a reaction right now because they see that this has nothing to do with representation, has nothing to do with merit or giving roles to people. It's all a negative. It's all about demonizing native Europeans and native Westerners, and it's all an issue of turning art into propaganda. When it comes to art, I've said it before, and some people are criticizing me for it. I'm very easy to please. Sometimes I just want to watch Arnold Schwarzenegger um, destroying everything and throwing deadly quotes. It's something like this. I don't like when I get the sense that when I watch art, it's completely gratuitous propaganda. And let me just give you a few more examples and I'll put a full stop. When you see shows on Netflix, there are quotas that directors have to fill in order to make the series or the movie. And often it comes in a very gratuitous way. Almost everything is being sexualized. Almost everything is being presented through the lens of the concerns of the woke activists. And I'll just give you one example, another. There was a series called Chaos. It was a retelling of ancient Greek myth. And out of nowhere, you have the protagonist talking to Dionysus in a bar. Dionysus, and then you have the following scene. Dionysus says, "Give me a minute." He stands up, he goes to the toilet, he fornicates with someone, and then comes back. Why? Why? What was the need for this scene? This scene was precisely there, had nothing to do with the plot. It added nothing. All of it was ticking diversity boxes. So, and the whole way of this being communicated isn't an issue of visibility or something. It's an issue of demonizing native Europeans, and you could say natives in the Western world. And there are obvious political and social implications of this claim. But I'd say that this is why now there seems to be such a backlash. And we have other things that send the message across that they haven't taken the material seriously. They care much more
Yeah.
about placating the Hollywood elite that is completely out of touch with the rest of the world than they care about doing justice to the Odyssey.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, doing justice to the Odyssey is critical. Is that the work stands higher than current morality, and stands higher in than perhaps what some you know boards have decided should be in a movie. It is disrespectful. I think perhaps that what caused the backlash, even with me, because I've been very quiet and calm about many of the things that had to do with the culture war. I've never mentioned any of it before. But I think why, this is my opinion, but in my view, the reason why there is such a backlash coming from all areas is that it is such a fundamental text. It is so important to our self-understanding. And the story, and especially when I saw the poster, what is it? To defy the gods? Is that what it says?
Yes.
If anyone who's read the Odyssey, yes, Poseidon punishes to some extent, of course, Odysseus, but the entire text is about Athena helping and helping Telemachus, giving I'm trying to say, giving thoughts to Odysseus, letting him see a path forward. The idea of Nostos itself, of a return home, that Odysseus chooses the life, the toil and moil of a mortal to return home, the beauty of that story, of that, and of these very important, when it comes to especially this Homeric epos, it's the simple human relations in which it's not about the great hero story. the simple relations in which he finds himself in, these simple, normal human relations that are at the same time related to nature and to the gods. And this, to me, I think this is what a film or any adaptation should try and show. How deeply man and nature, for example, are here connected. As you know, when young Dawn rises with her rosy fingers, to use Latimore's translation, um, Homer never misses to mention nature. Nature is always present, and it's the time of day always has to do with what's currently happening and what's possible, what you shouldn't be doing, etc. And there's so many ways of trying to show that if you have any understanding or sense for the text. So I really believe that it's, well, to use this word, this buzzword, it's triggered something in us, something deep, something of our cultural memory that we are born with.
Absolutely has. And it has crossed the line. People don't talk about this because they are scared to talk, frequently scared of social backlash. And it's easy for me to say this because I'm in a way, I understand this. I'm not in, I'm in a working environment where I don't have this. I had it before, so I understandably, I'm not talking down to people. It's just that I can afford sometimes being a bit more relaxed with what I say and what I say, and how I say it. But when it comes to this, it seems to me that it's again a culture that is forced on people. It's social engineering. It's a set of values that people dislike. And not only do they dislike, that's too it's too small a way of putting it. It doesn't do justice to it. It's a minority of people who are forcing down our throats a particular kind of propaganda, while we see that they govern and they support governors who really think that being European in general, and more specifically being German, being Bavarian, being Greek, being Athenian or Peloponnesian, whatever you want to call it, is a bad thing. Why? Because we are in an environment when we have the combination of two things: is rampant multiculturalism, is no bars, not everything goes, multiculturalism combined with wokeness. Multiculturalism on its own is as good as the groups that are going to coexist within a multicultural experiment. If they're compatible, it's better than if they're not. But there's always the question of degrees of compatibility and incompatibilities between the cultures of the various groups. But this, you could say that multiculturalism in some cases can work, especially if you have a central authority that can mitigate all the social strife and tension. But what we have now isn't just multiculturalism in the West, and especially Europe, is multiculturalism tied with wokeness. And wokeness, to be very brief, is the way I understand it, involves separating the world and into populations, and separating these populations into hierarchies from the oppressors to the least oppressed, and essentially saying that equal treatment isn't strong enough, isn't robust enough to achieve true equality or true justice or true community. So what wokeness does is invariably saying, well, who are the oppressors? Who are the oppressed? Let us constantly wage war against the oppressors and turn them into essentially second-class citizens. This sounds appealing to some people who may be very leftist and say, yes, I don't like the rich. We have the rich billionaire class. Yes, let's tax the hell out of them. But that isn't what's going on. If you see how the left is understanding the oppressors and the oppressed, and how, not just the left, it's not sometimes it doesn't have to do with the left. It's the progressive, let's say, elites. What they are doing is they are saying essentially we are going to have a global understanding of who is oppressed and who is the oppressor. And it's almost invariably the case that within their understanding of the world, they're presenting native Europeans, especially sometimes even the working class of native
especially
European
the working
countries,
class.
as oppressors,
Yeah.
who have to be treated as second-class citizens. And it's within this framework that people see this and they say, well, no, sorry, it's just the demonizing propaganda.
What's remarkable about it is that no one who is actually in power is ever addressed by them. That actually I find remarkable. I mean, almost no politician, certainly no billionaire, none of the, I think we call them philanthropists in the West. I think in Russia we call them oligarchs. So that they're never addressed. They're not, you're supposed to not take an aeroplane. But when all the important people come together, they are perfectly, fine to fly in with their private jets. So that's a remarkable, sort of, a weird thing. Yes, but I think when we think of Homer, we there's an idea that Homer is the educator of he's the prime example of early Greek paideia, a word that of course I grew up with and you too, and arete, to bring it to virtue. By the way, we were not allowed to translate the word arete in ancient Greek lessons at school, because our teachers said, there's no German word that actually could grasp the meaning of it. Arete is related to aristos, to the best, to a certain sense of aristocracy, etc. Goethe once said, "Jeder sei ein Grieche auf seine Art, aber sei's, everyone shall be a Greek in his way, but a Greek he shall be, or he must be." So we all have to become Greek in some sense if we want to be full and proper human beings. Which again, if we just look at human beings in terms of superficial labels, in terms of a hierarchy of the oppressed and the oppressors, we're actually quite far away from any sort of real education and formation of what it means to be human. It's quite remarkable how these things then come together and make it almost impossible to become full citizens. I mean, the point of all of Greek education is, of course, to actually have a real polis, a real polity, a real statehood that works, and when there is a bonum comune, to use that term, a common good that people strive towards and work towards and help defend also. So it's almost as though, with the woke ideology tries to address perhaps injustices, but then goes astray so badly, and never gets to articulate any positive vision of anything either, which we could have, for example, in Homer, especially with the Odyssey, if we only dared to read it and then maybe had a film that could also transpose it, because film or movies are one of the main mediums where people perhaps learn something.
Yes. And there is so much to learn from these epics. In a way, they were fundamental in forging a sense of community among the Greeks of the time. I think Herodotus says that Hesiod and Homer were very instrumental in the development of the ancient Greek understanding of identity. And when Herodotus is talking about the distinction between Greeks and barbarians, the barbarians were primarily non-Greeks. It's a linguistic category. Obviously, what?
Just to point this out briefly, I have here a civilized man, a Greek, talking to a barbaros. That would be me, I, as a German. Barbar. That's where the word comes from. That's how our language sounded to their ears, Just go on.
No, just what I wanted to say is that there were some people who used it in a sense of saying that, that in a very chauvinistic sense, but not everyone did. But when it comes to Homer, I think that he has such a such a breadth of vision. And he's in a way the first tragedian. I read the Iliad as a tragedy. And the Odyssey does have tragic elements in it. But the main issue with the movie, and I'll say what I think that the movie seems to be missing, especially given the marketing, is that there is a trouble people have with viewing the past, and we call it anachronism. Frequently, they view the past in light of the future, and they project elements of the future on the past. So it frequently happens. And what is interesting is that very frequently it's people who say this are people who will move forward and say, well, yeah, but you didn't understand Homer, and they're going to completely misrepresent him or present him through the lens of US 2026 identity politics, in which case it's the people from The View trying to annoy the MAGA people. That's not what Homer is about. So let's focus a bit on how we can understand what Homer is about. I mean, the best way, I think, to enter the ancient Greek worldview for me is Hesiod. Hesiod's texts are a bit dry, but I think that they sort of systematize myth in a way. He begins to systematize myth. And he tries to bring a sort of linear understanding into when things happen. Homer, on the other hand, isn't as systematic in how he presents the universe, but almost everyone agrees that his prose is far better, much more tragic, and is very good at expressing some elements of the human condition. And I will say, from a modern perspective, I hear many people who just read the Iliad or talk about the Iliad and just think it's a gory war epic where just one side tries to destroy the other. That's not all it is. It isn't just an issue of the good and the bad guys. It's not a simplistic, we are the side of good and they are the demons or in the wrong side of history. In fact, I would say some of the most moving scenes in the Iliad are scenes with Trojans. It's when Hector is talking to Andromache. It's when Priam is talking to Achilles about Hector. Homer is humanizing everyone. He isn't saying the Greeks, the Achaeans were the good guys and the other guys were on the wrong side of history. And he did this because he had a particular worldview in his mind. And defy the gods is just not part of it. It's the exact opposite. Now, obviously, humanity and the human intellect has evolved from the stage of myth. And if you ask me, that's a good thing. But when Homer was writing, he wanted to convey a sense of the tragic position of mankind in the universe, a position which is in a way tragic. There wasn't even discourse there back then about the notion of free will, which is my main topic in academia, if people are interested in it. That came much later. In myth, we have a more holistic worldview, not necessarily because people viewed life more holistically, but because things weren't separated enough yet. So when we try to read Homer, it isn't that we are just sat there listening to a guru telling us what the nature of the universe is, and we should just stop and take everything without question. We are seeing, in a way, an ancient society trying to come to terms with the tragedies of life and the tragedies of war that unfortunately was very common back then. And when it comes to defy the gods, is that in the ancient Greek mindset, essentially, there is an order that is imperfect. It later was postulated, I think it was postulated as perfect afterwards with philosophy, but before philosophy, the order was imperfect. There were lots of disruptions of that order because fundamentally the universe comes from chaos, and chaos is something that is built into the fabric of the universe. So what happens is that there is a constant. What I think um, Joseph Campbell mentioned in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and the hero's journey is you have order, the disruption of the order, and the hero then tries to to fight chaos. So this is what constantly happens before in the age of the gods with Zeus, and then it's the age of the heroes, and that's where the Iliad and the Odyssey take place. And what we have is constant, in a way, constant chaos erupting here or there, and people trying to be an instrument of divine justice. So it's not defy the gods; it's the exact opposite. It is help help divine justice to reassert itself over chaos and be an instrument of divine justice. That's that's what it is. And the suitors and Polyphemus as well are essentially representing barbarity in the uncivilized sense, because fundamentally you could say that these myths definitely definitely refer to the passage from the uncivilized state to civilization. And part of civilization requires reconciliation, conflict resolution, the kind that Achilles wasn't open to. It requires goodwill, the kind of goodwill that Polyphemus didn't show to Odysseus and his crew. And it also requires you to not abuse hospitality and not abuse people's goodwills, just like the suitors. So it's it's not about defying the gods. And if he talks about the suitors, then why are you talking about the suitors in a movie about Odysseus? It's your main focus should be Odysseus.
So I think this is how, thanks to the new Twitter or X algorithm that was washed up on my show when you said it's the exact opposite. Odysseus is an instrument of the gods. And I know this guy. Click follow.
Yes.
uh, and then I think I messaged you, which was this is because you articulated, as you just did again for us, exactly what I wasn't able to articulate in that moment. So thank you for that. It's an extremely important. Also, what you mentioned, someone to stress this again, is not good versus evil. It's tragic. That means there are two parties being, pushed together by Ananke herself, by fate, by necessity. It's not as though Helena wants to be taken. It's not as though, you can't really look for the even just look. I mean, if you want to be very specific with the language, very many of the constructions in Homer are participle constructions to keep it simple. So there's not an acting subject here that we are so used. I did this and then this happens. We can talk about this shift also when it comes to the Odyssey. There's a bit more of Odysseus seeing himself, and also Homer, or the poet seeing himself. But the tragic element means that there's something in motion, the elemental or chaos itself, that or we could just perhaps say in a modern way, there's different interests that clash together. And but
Yes.
it's not as though Hector is evil and Achilles is good, or the other way around. And one of the most moving scenes is really Hector bidding for, and he knows he's going to die. He has to go because it's his place to go. It's his fight. It's his battle. He has to face Achilles. He's almost certain of death, and he wishes farewell to his son and to his wife Andromache. It is one of the most moving things. I remember reading this in 17 or 18 during my Griechisch Leistungskurs, as we used to say in German. So that's you major towards for your A levels. I was so I wrote a song on it actually back then, on this particular scene, because it's it's let's say roughly speaking 3,000 years old, and it still speaks to us through the eons. There's a moving scene. of a man leaving his family behind because duty calls, because his city demands it so, and because the gods demand it. And why for us this is, we say, why not chicken out? No, he has to, because this helps maintain order. It's similar, by the way, with Socrates. Socrates drinks the hemlock. He commits suicide. He has to, or else he would be rebel or revolt against the order of the polis, and that would only exacerbate chaos. So sometimes you have to maintain order, to help maintain the bonum commune. Perhaps do certain things that we might say, as modern individuals, we wouldn't want to do, perhaps. And I think, what a movie could show is that this is, in some sense, not our world, but we can still appreciate certain things about it. It doesn't have to just mirror a certain morality of the day. It has to show us a certain strangeness that we can still relate to see. Because this is, what is a movie even for, if not trying to show us a different world, to look at something that is strange to us and give us an introspection into this and into ourselves as well. That could have been what they could have done. And even you could have the gods present. I don't know if they will be present, or in which way we don't know yet. But I think there's a way of doing this. So yeah, I just wanted to stress this again, how important this is, what you said about the gods, and also that it's not necessarily good versus evil. Maybe just briefly. So what changes from the Iliad to the Odyssey is how the poet, let's just call him Homer, the in the Odyssey, the muse, in the Iliad, the muse is asked to sing about the rage or the anger of Achilles. In the Odyssey, we find something as andra moi enne pemusa. So, of the man, to me sing, O muse. So there's already a me, a moi, and that moi repeats and recurs again throughout the 24 books, when Odysseus refers to himself and his plight, that what he has to go through to try and make it home, but he's willing to go. So there's a certain sense. You're talking about free will, but there's a certain sense of, I would say, maybe you disagree, of awakening freedom, if you like, in here too.
Definitely. And you've raised so many points here that I want to add to.
Feel free.
When it comes to the Iliad, then I'll go to the Odyssey. Another thing we see here is essentially moral dilemmas, because it seems to me that the gateway to understanding the ethical considerations that Homer is raising, without necessarily answering all of them, we'll talk a bit about that later, is that Odysseus is the one who goes home, and neither Achilles nor Hector. And Achilles and Hector essentially are far more alike than they are different. Homer represents them as having a code that I disagree with saying that this is the Homeric code, like many people are saying, because they're saying, well, there's a Homeric ideal and it's Achilles. I think that's a bit premature, because Homer is presenting, in this case, how people acted in a war situation. I don't think we can draw the inference from that to that's how Homer thinks you have to act in all situations. So I'm a bit cautious when people start talking about the Homeric ideal as being completely exhibited by Hector and Achilles. So when it comes to Hector and Achilles, I think they put glory above everything else. And the scene with Andromache, who is his wife, who's telling him, "Don't go to fight Achilles, because if you go and fight it, you're gonna die. Troy will fall, and all of us will either die or get horribly abused." And that's exactly what happened. And he says, "I can't do anything." So essentially, the code, you can read the Iliad as a criticism of that code. in both cases. And it's Odysseus who came home for several reasons. I think you can view it from a theological perspective. Odysseus is much more like Athena and Zeus, because he combines power with cunning and wisdom. And although in the Iliad, Odysseus is presented a bit of a more brutish guy who sometimes goes to night ops and kills people in their sleep, in the Odyssey, in the beginning, he is described as wise and as someone that Zeus loves. So there is also a shift there. And when it comes to this, we could say that when it comes to Odysseus, Odysseus goes to the underworld, and he talks to people there, and he talks to Achilles. Maybe they could have done better casting for the role of Achilles. So he goes there, and Achilles tells him in the underworld, I'd rather live again a day alive where I wasn't going to be a king. I'm going to just plow a field or something. I'd be a farmer, someone without this kind of glory, than be the king of the underworld. So the Odyssey represents Odysseus as the one who managed to get home. And Odysseus is someone who can actually let his guard down. He can move back to civilization. And there is also another episode. There were many episodes between these epics, and there were many epics that were sadly lost. And there is an episode after the death of Achilles that Sophocles turned into a tragic play called Ajax. And Ajax and Odysseus, Ajax, I think, of Telamon, fought for the armor of Achilles. And the Achaeans picked Odysseus as representing the man who they considered to be their champion. And Ajax completely lost it, and he wanted to slay them. And Athena made him deluded. He thought that some holy cattle were the Achaeans, and he slayed them. And then he woke up, he understood the illusion, and he fell on his sword. And that's where many people saying that this represents a shift on how warfare was being understood. And Odysseus is much more modern than Achilles or Ajax or Hector. It isn't just the 1v1 battle on the battlefield outside Troy that we see in the Iliad, where occasionally some people will stop asking the person they're fighting where they come from. There's a wonderful scene there in the beginning of the Iliad about an Achaean fighting a Trojan, and they discover that they have common friends, and they say, right, let's go fight other guys. If it comes down to us, we'll find what happens. But then it's a more strategic understanding of warfare, and a very strategic use of force that is designed to create the maximum damage with the minimum amount of sacrifice. And essentially it's, right, if we are going to be in a chaotic situation, let's take the means necessary in order to recreate order as fast as possible. And that's what he represents also with the Trojan horse. And that's how essentially the nature of warfare changed. So Odysseus is someone who has what it takes to get home. And homecoming is something that for him has two massive dimensions that are, I really want to hear what you think about. One is that he decides to not be mortal, to get home. Because Calypso in the island that he's stranded in the very beginning is trying to keep him to the island, and he offers him immortality. And this is just a deceptively small passage, where it's essentially incredibly important for the whole story. It's easy to miss. Sometimes Odysseus writes like Joseph Conrad. There's a kind of flow in the scenes where you don't understand when one scene goes to the other, and it's easy to miss something really important. And the second is that Homecoming is also, the way I see it, and I'd really like to hear what you think about it. The Homecoming is also a metaphor of finding your place in the world. And it seems to me that this is a really powerful theme that they could have used. And they could use. I hope they do. It's just that when it comes to the movie, we see that all the signs show that they don't care that much to portray the epic, to do justice to the epic. But let's forget about the movie. I'm sure people are going to talk about it a lot. But let's go to the Odyssey. What do you think about these two aspects
Yeah,
of the epic?
it's. I mean, this. I'm just reminded uh, of this Italian novel that's been standing on top of my bookshelf, Stefano D'Arrigo, Halkyon's Orca, which is the story of Nostos, where Nostos is no longer possible after the war. So it's been sitting there waiting to be read in Italian. So maybe this year after the Odyssey. But yes, so I mean, so obviously the Odysseus who is to return home is a changed man. To quote, I think Plotinus, no, Master Eckhart, why do you go out? In order to return home. But he who returns home is a changed man, and he returns to a changed, perhaps even a changed world. And so and I think that this is of this, what does it mean to be European? It means to be Odysseus. It, we are trying to find a place on this continent. We are trying to find a place amongst each other. We are trying to find a way of living peacefully, I hope. And also we are, and I don't want to import too many words like, it's his own free will, etc. But the fact that he wants to clearly remain mortal, a protos, and chooses mortality over even just heroism, or actual immortality with Calypso, is also significant, because that means he chooses and maybe I want to import, but I want to speak in the language that people understand easily. So he chooses a definite horizon, and that gives him meaning, because that horizon is, so Homecoming is connected to his mortality. He chooses mortality to see his son and his wife again, to be united with his family, with his house, with his oikos, and hence also, I think, in this way, again, contribute to the order of the world. I read, for example, also Plato's Politeia. I read Aristotle's Politics and his Nicomachean Ethics also as ways of trying to find that balance that we always need to find in order for chaos not to have its way. Hence why Aristotle's books, just to go to Aristotle now, often end with the divine, with the theoria of the divine, of seeing the divine, and which is sometimes for a brief moment possible for mortals. And in choosing this, in choosing mortality, he chooses a definite limit to his existence, and from that limit, the meaning of his existence arises. That's what. So this is a fundamental story of who we are. We want to return home. We are, in some sense, you could say, we are strangers in the world, and we want to return home. And so we're not just born here, done. No, there is this searching aspect to the European. As you know, Spengler speaks of the Faustian man who strives and wants to possess the world. I think it starts much earlier. It is Odysseus who strives to return home, but it's not just striving towards anywhere, it's striving back. As I'm currently reading Goethe's Faust Part 2, again, let me just mention, Faust falls in love with Helena so deeply that he bends space and time to see her, to meet her, and also to come in touch with an order or an ordering of the elemental, of the chaotic, which he then tries to bring into quote unquote modernity. So we, in some sense, we must encounter we must encounter the Greeks again and again because they've given us a way of making sense of the world. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to find. I think we don't need any sort of anything radically new here. We just need to be able to read these texts in a way that we appreciate how we're different. You mentioned the move from mythos to logos, and that you would prefer a non-mythic world over a mythic world, perhaps. But there's still a way of encountering this and seeing that we're not entirely in control of every situation. And hence, so these elements of homecoming, of accepting mortality, of knowing that we are, in some sense, strangers in the world, this is what makes us. Maybe the film actually shows this. Maybe this is what it's all about, and we're doing it great injustice. I'll just be that generous now. I fear that it's not about that.
I think it's most probably it's going to be a hugely missed opportunity. But when it comes to back to what you said about the way that the Odyssey is being communicated, one of the fundamental meanings is be a force for civilization. And if you're a force for civilization, then you do have a place in the world. And you have to find it. And trying finding it can be very frustrating, can take years, sometimes decades. Now, this is the case, it was just a decade. But the meaning is essentially if you can handle civilization, there is a place for you in civilization. You have to find it. And you can see when civilization breaks down, and you can see that, for instance, when people violate what is considered to be morality. In Homer and Hesiod, it's portrayed as the divine law of Themis, you could say. And when they try to flesh it out, their answer was that the divine law involves xenia, which is hospitality. And that implies it goes two ways. You have to be a good host and you have to be a good guest. If you're a bad host, you're disrespecting civilization fundamentally. If you're a bad guest, you're disrespecting civilization. Why? Because the ancient Greeks, they knew, like everyone who is mildly sophisticated knows, that social life involves lots of tension. It gives rise to tension occasionally, unless we have a sort of diffusing attitude towards tension. Tension can escalate into conflict. And unless we have good ways of resolving conflict, that conflict is going to escalate and destroy the social order. So when it comes to the question of European civilization and the importance of the Odyssey, you could say that one answer is that the Odyssey shows a direction towards the question, what does a man have to do to maintain civilization, and when does civilization break down? And it seems to me that one of the reasons, to get back to the first question of why is there such a backlash? I mean, obviously, there are many reasons for it. But I would say that from a sophisticated perspective, it seems to me that the very people who are promoting this movie, defending it, and doing marketing for it, and talking about it, seem to integrate all their activism and their rhetoric within a worldview that says that fundamentally there is no such thing as a European or Western hospitality that must be respected. There is no such thing as abusing European hospitality. There's no such thing as abusing Western hospitality. And if you are going to go in particular, there's no such thing for them from that perspective as abusing German hospitality, French hospitality, English hospitality, Greek hospitality, American hospitality. So it seems to me that the Odyssey is, in a way, showing a direction, just like the Iliad does. They're showing a direction. This is sometimes much more powerful to hold mankind's imagination captive than just fleshing out a very particular ethical sense. It structures the way we think about things. So they have, in a way, a very special place within the ancient Greek and European canon because they set the stage. They point the direction towards the question of not only just what does it mean to come home, but also where is our place in the universe? How are we to find it? What gives life meaning? What doesn't give life meaning, but apparently does? Or what seems to be giving life meaning, but it essentially doesn't? How does civilization break down? How does civilization maintain itself? How can we keep it, or how can we restore it? So it seems to me that these are some very deep themes that seem to be completely alien to the spirit of those who govern the Western world right now, or at least many countries within the Western world. And it seems to me that the people who we could mention a bit the translation of Emily Wilson,
Yes,
and how
yeah.
she has been seen by Christopher Nolan as, and she has been treated by modern academia as someone who has presented the masterpiece of a translation. It isn't.
No, it
It
isn't.
just is.
So, yeah, there's so much. I mean, so the elegance, for example, of Lettemore, if we just look at the very first line of Polytropon, he just translates as a man of many ways, you know. And I think that's it's elegant. It's as simple as the word Polytropon. We don't need to impose anything into. We don't need to say he's sort of. I think what Emily is her name, Watson or something, or Wilson.
Emily Watson.
Interesting. Isn't that the same name as the Harry Potter
She
actress?
she translated him as complicated.
Yes, complicated. He's a complicated man, you know. I mean, I can hear the Valley Girl accent. Just
Yes.
he was a complicated man. And towards the end, is it book 21? There's a passage I sent you, which you are aware of. I have to look at my email now. I think where she translates polymetes, which is similar to Polytropon, of course, as um lying. So my pronunciation, of course, is different rules. Polymitis. This is book 24, line 303. She says, lying, Odysseus replied, I will tell you the truth completely. And that, I mean, it seems so innocent, right? But it isn't. It's you are now presented with Odysseus as a complicated man who ultimately then in book 24 is just a liar. And I think this
Yeah.
is what she's trying to convey: is this fundamental heroic figure is a liar.
Well, maybe because Penelope was waiting for him for 20 years and couldn't explore her options with local Tinder with the suitors. That's ridiculous. And one thing is that lots of people who talk about the Homeric epics and the ancient epics, they talk about, they point something that is half true, that they point towards something that is true, that it was a hierarchically structured society, and justice wasn't understood in the same way that it's understood later, especially after the Stoics, Cicero, and then the Christians. Yeah, it was like this, but this doesn't mean that Odysseus was fundamentally someone who was against female liberation or against the oppressed or anything. And just one thing is that almost no one, except for maybe Perseus in the Greek canon, is presented as someone who had a relatively good ending. Almost every hero has a tragic ending. I think it's only Perseus who had a good ending. So it's not. I hope to do the spoiler that I think in the ancient Greek canon, Odysseus is killed in Ithaca by a son of his called Telegonos. And there was an epic that was sadly lost called the Telegony, depicting that. So it's never as simple. It is complicated, but not in the way that is that this translation is suggesting. It's that we are presented with a view of humanity as being locked in a tragic situation where there are no utopian solutions, and in many ways, there is a sort of cannibalism of life. Maybe Schopenhauer somehow discussed this, but he was saying that life is something that is really wasteful and in some respects cannibalistic. What?
He's not, because he said also that life is a business that doesn't cover its costs. So
Yes, yeah, not the happiest philosopher to read. But there is an issue in there is an issue in the Homeric epics and there in the canon, because you ask yourself, well, if the gods are essentially responsible for everything, why is it that humans are why is it that they commit hubris? And then the question is, well, actually, it's not exactly that they aren't responsible for anything, but it's not exactly clear also what they're responsible for.
yes, I mean, so I mean, this people, we would have to. I think internet people say spurk out and go into the grammar, etc. It's a very different way of understanding. It's not just purely about personal responsibility. Even the gods stand under, of course, Ananke herself again against necessity, and things take their course. And once they've taken their course, Todenon, the terrifying element, when it shows itself, there's you can't escape fate in a sense, but you have to. I mean, and if there is defiance of fate, then it hits you even stronger, as mentioned throughout the Odyssey. But it's not as though the gods just. It's not so much perhaps about responsibility, but by showing this, it's actually, in some sense you could almost call it existentialist. It shows what that to exist means to be in the midst of let's just say forces that we are outside of our control. And the Greeks have a way of addressing this, that if you're Aristotle, you think of it as cathartic. If you're Nietzsche, then you think of it as a tonic, which is quite different. But maybe it is cathartic in a sense. Really, it helps us understand and appreciate. Go on, our our tragic existence, that we so awfully just want to brush off in our time, where we just say everything's wonderfully marching towards ever greater utopian freedom.
I completely agree with you, and I want to give an example of some relatively recent scholarship on the Homeric epics as cathartic, and this also, as far as I'm concerned, dispels the myth that modern academia does zero good work on
There's lots
Homer
of good
or
work.
the engineers.
Yeah.
Just not the case. It's just that, well, some people get selected to and get promoted and it's not always merit-based. There is a clinical psychologist called Jonathan Shea, who has written 2 books. One is Achilles in Vietnam, and the other Odysseus in America. And he is saying that they are very cathartic epics because you can see them as describing perfectly the experience of many soldiers during war, and in Odysseus's case, the difficulties of returning home after for veterans. And when it comes to Achilles, he was, and then how I'll link this with how he says it's cathartic. He was saying that the rage of Achilles, he was working with the Vietnam veterans, and he said that the Homeric epics gave him a very good way of getting some of his points across and communicating with them. And they found the epics profound, and they saw themselves in Achilles. And he was saying that it is a phenomenon, especially during protracted warfare, where you have soldiers doing the work on the ground, and occasionally they're going to get orders that they consider to be completely unfair, and they will get very alienated with the higher management, those higher in command, not management. Sorry, I was thinking of the other stuff, but those higher in the chain of command, and they will frequently feel betrayed. And he said that when they felt betrayed, their moral and social horizons shrunk to very few people, 1 or 2 people. And when one of them died, they would go completely berserk. They would constantly feel that they had it well and everyone else had it worse than them, and feel guilty for everything. And they usually do things when they go berserk that from a rational perspective seem completely suicidal. So he was saying that the Homeric epics were also, apart from the other bit, means for a society in which war was incredibly common, and where the audience would almost certainly be an audience involving veterans, was a means of it was a cathartic means of meditating upon the experience people had during war, which was also which functioned in a way that tried to civilize and bring them back into society, and try to help them deal with the trauma of that kind of experience. And he was saying that when it comes to the Odyssey, he could also see in it a representation of the incredibly difficult experience of going back into normalcy and peace for war veterans, especially those who have fought on enemy lines, not the ones who don't see combat. So there's definitely a cathartic element there on multiple levels. It isn't just, it's also the psychological level and the very specific military aspect of it. But there's also obviously a huge metaphor for the human condition. And as you mentioned, that to be in a way is to try to get back home, and to get back home in civilization. The polis was incredibly important, was the pillar of the moral horizon of the ancient Greeks, at least until the age of Alexander. So there's definitely a major cathartic element in these epics.
Yes, and so in this sense, Homer may be the educator of mankind, if I dare say mankind anymore, of the world, even if, let's say in Europe, we have a deeper, more direct connection to it. But there is something perhaps I usually don't use this word, but I just want to get across what I'm trying to say. So something archetypical about these heroes. There's something that can speak across the eons and across the regions, and that would open. There's so much pretense of actual dialogue where there isn't. So what this could do is, in such a project, it could actually open genuine dialogue um, amongst those. For example, instead of moralizing and demeaning someone, Odysseus he's just a complicated liar. And instead, but that would require on the part, of us to appreciate this text as somewhat of our own, but also a bit strange to us, and not just use these Procrustes beds of whatever the current quote unquote morality might be that we push things into. So yes, good work is still being done in academia. I agree. It's strange who gets selected to be a spokesperson for it. And so in some sense, this moment will pass. But if perhaps it even leads to a sort of renaissance or rediscovery of this text, and underneath the specter of Hollywood, to an appreciation of the text, and how it could actually, in some sense, lead to dialogue across cultures rather than just have stand-ins for identity, which is always so striking, right? It's just you have these sort of focus group label identities that all need to be fulfilled, and that then is the pretense of I think representation, or however they think of it.
Yeah, and I would say that even representation is a pretext. And
Yeah.
I give an example because I like trying to find, let's say, ways for satisfying several demands. Not always, if I consider them really bad, but you could make a case that if they want to do representation of particular groups, they could actually do it without being unfaithful to the text. And when it comes to the whole Helen of Troy was black and Athena was black and all this discourse, if it were about black representation, they could easily try and bring in, for instance, characters from Ethiopia from the Greek canon. And let me just give you a very quick example. There was the Greeks didn't hate the Ethiopians. They didn't hate them at all. They considered them a very a race that lived in the edges of the universe, and they didn't consider them bad at all. And they did have the character of King Memnon, who was the king of Ethiopia, and he went to fight for Troy. And Memnon killed Nestor's son, Archilochus. And then he had a fight with Achilles, and Achilles killed him. And I think Zeus turned him immortal. But that doesn't mean that Homer or the other epic poets who wrote this as, here is this bad character dying. They didn't portray Hector as bad. Why would they portray him as bad? So if they just wanted to make it about representation, they could easily show elements of the Trojan War and ancient Greek canon about the Trojan War that involves the Ethiopians. They could, I don't know, maybe they could put Odysseus speak also with the ghost of Andromeda in the underworld. Maybe they could do a cameo of the sort. So what is the case here is that it seems to me, if it were about, let's say, let's have some representation because we want to help a marginalized community and give them more visibility, and what they frequently say, they could actually do it while still remaining faithful to the canon. So it seems like that wasn't what they are going for. They say that they want to do this, but it seems to be like saying, well, no, race swapping is to be only one way. If, for instance, I think when it comes to, let's pick the ancient Indian epics. In the ancient Indian epics, we have the avatars of Vishnu, who is the god of balance and the Hindu Trinity, who has avatars that visit Earth every time there is complete chaos, and he goes to balance the order again. Vishnu was always portrayed as blue. So yeah, if they do a representation of Vishnu where Vishnu is white, I wouldn't like it. I'd say no, Vishnu is supposed to be blue. And the same applies for other colors. So it seems to me that we are having a conversation, and we are sort of forced to have this conversation. That is a conversation that is ridiculous, and it treats us from the very beginning as having to sort of prove that we are not racist. And you're not called to prove a negative. It's like constantly, it's like we have every time we give into this, it's like we act as if we have the presumption of guilt, and we have to claim ourselves to be innocent in the eyes of whoever governs our institutions. That's why it seems to me that this is why there's such a massive backlash.
Yeah.
It's because it's being portrayed in a way as the spearhead of a culture that seems to me to be completely annoying and destructive when it comes to European civilization and civilization in general.
And to take this to its almost logical conclusion, this would mean to destroy, defile, dare I say, Homer's genuine heritage, which is to be the educator, to say this again, apparently, of mankind. These epics can speak to everyone, even if someone is, and people are from different traditions, you know, people come from different, very different, not just backgrounds. It's the ground. They come from different grounds. Let's just say this. It's not just something abstractly behind them, but even then, it can speak to them. Because there's something, and this is a term from Richard Wagner, by the way, something rein menschlich, something purely human that shines through, which is why Shakespeare is so great, which is what Goethe aspires to do, which is what the Greeks were able to do, and which we find in other literature as well, is that there's something that speaks genuinely then to everyone on the purely human level, and then you've got all the other levels to respect as well. But here we have a very weird product, in a sense, something that takes such a fundamental text and then turns it into a pastiche, sort of like a hackneyed kitsch-like product that is focus grouped and then sold to perhaps as many people as possible across the globe. You need to have this, and this in here. You need to have a rapper in here apparently as well. And the which, as you know, is in the tradition of Homer, especially this one. And so you wonder what even the point of this is. You could have just made another Marvel film. You know, you could have just invented a story. It doesn't have to be Homer, because if we, it's ultimately it's really crude nihilism. It's actually nihilistic. It destroys something fundamental, I think, at least, of how we make sense of the world. And in that sense, it is quite a remarkable, dare I say, you don't have to agree with this, crime. I think it is. It is actually criminal, because it takes away what Homer could be and should be and always has been, and turns it into an instrument, not of the gods, but an instrument of interests that we don't fully perhaps know what they are.
I agree with you. And it seems to me that it's annoying enough when they do this constantly, without anyone asking for it, in movies, in advertisements, in culture in general. But this crosses a line because it's in a way fundamental. It's like treating, as you mentioned, the educator of mankind as a subordinate tool for political expediency in 2026 US, for a radical Democrat crowd to trash the mega people. That's that's essentially what the way they're doing it is. That this should be something that it should unite people and be a civilizing force, a binding force, instead of treating this as a tool for woke progressive propaganda. And yes, there's nothing remotely correct about it. There's nothing remotely correct. And it's also communicated in a way where we are being talked down to, Pat. We're being told that, well, no, but you're a racist if you care about this. You're a racist if you care about detection. No, it's absolutely not. That's why it's communicated in a way that shows that it is integrated in an agenda that is essentially violating not just truth and history, but also the meaning of the epic, which involves the discourse about when a civilization breaks down. And I'm sorry, but yes, this kind of progressivism, it has completely abused any kind of hospitality that has been shown.
That's the absurdity of it. That's the absurdity.
When people give you liberties, when people give you liberties, and you live in societies that are the freest societies that have ever existed, don't respond by saying that this society is the worst society possible because you just want to use this as a means of further resource extraction.
Yeah, it's a instead of, this is the grotesque absurdity is that instead of Homer being a civilizing, uniting force, an education to all of humankind, we are sort of it actually is a totalitarian system.
Yes.
It's quite
it is because it also involves mind reading. It isn't just what you say, it's also how you feel. And when it comes to subjectivity, that's also the other bit. Is that I'll be very brief on this. Is that if we look at how legislation changes, it becomes so subjective that it leads to domination in every environment this legislation is pushed forward in. Why? Because if the rules are do not offend someone, there are no publicly verifiable criteria for establishing whether the offense has taken place or not. It's not like don't kill, don't steal, which is required in any civilized society, where you can actually do some research and see if some person, the accused person, has killed or stealed or not. It's something that is completely subjective, and it's entirely arbitrary. The people who are governing the structures that give people jobs, and also the structures in which we live, they can introduce wokeness, treat everyone as guilty by default, and they can just choose themselves for how long they are going to allow us to get away with. So it's a tool for domination. For citizens and employees. And also, you could say, members of families.
Yes. All under it's got this ghost-like quality. These texts then become, they're supposed to answer to something they're not. answering to. Um, uh, so it's yeah. I mean, I should end. I should like to just quote you again and end on a high note. Is that Homer is a civilizing and uniting force, and we should keep him in that memory and spread the word in this manner to the world and help perhaps find those from anywhere really who see in Homer the same or similar and who can learn from, let's just say, the humanity that is in these texts. And humanity doesn't mean anything rosy or blue-eyed, but glaukopis, clear-eyed, like Athena. We sharp-eyed. We see or flashy-eyed. Or sometimes it's also gray-eyed, depending. But it's sort of a view of what it means to be human, which always also includes that we are mortal beings and we all face our tragedies and things we cannot ultimately perhaps resolve, and so that it's almost like a stark warning against any sort of utopian vision of whatever kind of the future, which then never arrives. Another issue of modernity that we can discuss at another time, perhaps in another venue. So I'd like to thank you again so much for taking the time, Stelios, and I've learned a lot here. So thank you for that. I'll definitely link to your YouTube channel if you'd like to mention anything else where people can find you. Please feel free. In any closing
Thank
remarks.
you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed our discussion. I think it's an important one. People can find me on Lotus Eaters, where I do more political commentary, and also they can find me on X. Warning: on X, I'm not always serious. I frequently do some memes and stuff, so it's not always serious. Don't take that with a pinch of salt. And if you want more philosophy, they can find me on Philosophy Across Time on YouTube. It's a new channel. It has 3 episodes right now as we speak on ancient philosophy. And later, it's going to be philosophy of every age.
The good thing about philosophy is it's all evergreen. So
Yes.
you you upload it once and it'll be in 100 years it's still valid, it's still true. So thank you so much, Stelios.
Well, thank you.